Okay, greetings and hallucinations, brethren. Thank you for joining us here on Shepherd's Voice magazine here on YouTube. And that expression I've used before, greetings and hallucinations, because there's a coworker who works in the back. He uses this expression all the time, and it just catches on. So, my apologies for that. But either way, thank you for joining us here, whatever you do, either on the premiere or at a later date. Most views come at a later date, but and that's perfectly fine. The message doesn't change over time, so we're just grateful for any subscribers that are chiming in, and we're also appreciative to those if they see a message they like, they share it. We want to we trust your judgment. Just if there's something to be shared, do share. I mean, we're in the work and faith that shares. So just wanted to encourage you to do that. So last week, I mean, wow, a number of viewers of this channel and people I know personally, there's been a big deep freeze going on, and very cold temperatures in certain parts of Canada, here in the United States. I mean, people in the United States don't really know cold as, like in the 50 in the states that I'm in, Chicago. They don't really know cold as I have known cold and been told of cold. But I think things have warmed up a little bit, and I hope everybody's coming out of it okay. But my goodness, there was a real cold snap there. So I'm going back up to Canada in a couple of days, and I understand it's warming up a little bit. So God willing, the trip will work out okay. So yeah, really cold. Really, all these reports of cold. I'm just like, wow. But I've been there, and I've been through that. Unfortunately, we've got natural gas, and we got heat for the most part. But some don't fare very well on it, and some animals too. So there is that. All right. So aside from that, I think I'll just get started today. I don't think I'm going to be talking very long. We'll see how it goes. I wanted to put something together today based on some thoughts, but you never know really how it's going to come together. But I got 4 pages of notes. Typically it's 5 or 6, so this may not be as lengthy a presentation. It all depends. It really all depends. Anyway, now there is this story in John chapter 9 where a blind man receives sight. And we've talked about this before, and I might allude to some of the things that we've shared regarding this incident, but there is so much that comes out of this in John chapter 9, and it goes in John chapter 10. We won't go that far, but there is just so much being exposed here that we need to take into account for ourselves and try to relate and immerse ourselves in these kinds of situations and see what's going on. See what Jesus Christ's intent was, and how he was doing the works of his Father, and how we might be able to incorporate this into understanding the works. We need to understand the works in order to do the works. We need to do his works. We should have a level of understanding of what it's all about. And this particular passage of Scripture in chapter 9 does tell us a lot. So I want to just spend some time here and just see how it goes. We'll just try to make this work. Because certain things were recorded. I mean, it's elsewhere, I think, in John himself says there's so many other things that the books couldn't hold it. But certain things were recorded for a reason, because they have this everlasting, this lasting principle for us to consider. So not every event that Jesus Christ was involved in has been recorded, and maybe for certain reasons, but the apostles, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, recorded certain things and allowed themselves certain interpretations and experiences and investigations to find out sometimes the background that was going on during that time. The background, like every story has a background to it. there's always this background, and they try to bring this forward to us. And so we want to understand that a little bit as well. Okay, so John chapter 9, and I got it open here, just in case, but I have the notes of the scriptures here in front of me anyway. And so let's just start there. A man was born blind, receives sight. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And I think this must have been well understood or known at the time. Okay? And his disciples asked him, saying, and obviously the disciples knew about it, saying, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So he was somehow known. It was known of him that he was born blind. Okay? So they saw him regarding this fellow. And if you think about this, he says, "Rabbi, who sinned?" Sort of like a kind of a black and white expression. Whose fault is this? Whose fault is this? There's no left here. There's nothing here that says who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind, or is there some other reason here, or is there something other on some other circumstances we just don't understand? But that was the popular thinking of the day. And so the disciples did not look at the man as an object of mercy. They didn't look at him as though someone who had a need. They just kind of regarded him in some sort of theological discussion. This is it. It's much easier. It's much easier to discuss an abstract subject like, say, sin, than it is to minister to a concrete need on the life of a person. And I'm going to go back to that statement maybe when we conclude. It's like, Jesus, how can we or you minister to the need of this man because he's apparently was a beggar and he had a need, or he was very disadvantaged. Let's put it that way. And what I said here, it's much easier to discuss an abstract subject or get into a theological discussion about these kinds of things and what's going on in the world and with people and the church and all these kinds of things and making predictions and all that. I think we're all guilty of that from time to time. Maybe we make up our minds about things and make decisions and judge something according to whatever values or experience or whatever measure we think we can judge a situation is. And particularly in regards to those who have different views, or we might be considered deceived religiously or deceived politically, because that's the big hot button now about the divisions, and say in the United States between left and right, and all these social issues and geopolitics and all these kinds of things. Where should the money be spent? Where is the need that should occur? How do we deal with these things? And I've seen this too in Church of God circles, where some go to promote their ministries, going after garner attention, talking about, say, these globalists or some new world order that we should all be worried about. And we've talked about this before, and this is not what this is about. But it's sort of like this idea basically is to go back into these theological discussions or these geopolitical discussions. It's much easier to talk about that than actually working hard to the real needs of the people and the real needs of what God's work is trying to address, which chapter 9 really brings to us. So we need to reflect on ourselves here on this. This is not some kind of this discussion, rote idea of just presenting something that says, "Oh, remember this," and just go through it, and you're done, and then either you click a like or a dislike here. That's not the point. It's not the point of this message at all, or anything that I think I like to be involved in. So we've talked about these things. There are those who are trying to garner this kind of attention to themselves. That is, that we have this theological construct of who they are and what their future might be. We have this theological constructs that we create for ourselves to kind of identify what's going on and who's what and who's doing what for why. What nation's doing this and this. We may get too much involved into this. And the disciples here at the time were going based on the feelings of somebody, what happened here? Like somebody's got this affliction. Well, did the parents sin or did he sin? Or what happened? Or what does this man or his parents that he was born blind? But the thing is, if he's born blind, that means that he sinned in the womb or what's going on? So it's just a little bit bizarre in some sense. But Christ himself said, I did not come to judge the world. And I think this is kind of what the disciples were kind of doing. It's like, they were judging it one way or the other. It's either you guys or you guys, but some of you, one of you have to take the blame for this. He says here in John 12, I have come as a light into the world, verse 46, that whoever believes in me should not abide in darkness, which is very much part of the discussion. And if anyone hears my words and does not believe, I do not judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. So we need to consider our own worldview and not get into these ideas of warning people about impending doom or upcoming enemies or trying to identify who the enemies are, domestic and international, domestic or foreign. This seems to be a big thing nowadays with many, particularly that profess Christ as their Savior, from whether in the Church of God or the Sabbatarian community as we know it, or even beyond. So we need to consider our own selves, because we all, like I say, we all fall into these kinds of traps once in a while, or we seem to start to judging things in the way we shouldn't. Because I got a video sent to me, and I was sent by text. I only watched 1 or 2 minutes, maybe of it, just to kind of, what's this about? Who is this person making this presentation? It was sent to me, different from a friend, and the guy has this. These guys get these websites or these YouTube channels, typically these websites. And this guy was just going on and off about power, on the power going after our freedoms, certain elements in society, certain authorities, using, hyperbole, the Gestapo was coming after us and all these kinds of things. Just getting everybody mad. I could just see myself getting irritated listening to it, so I just stopped watching it. And I looked at this thing, and it's like, why would anybody invest their time into watching this kind of stuff? So I can just feel myself kind of getting mad. So I generally just don't watch these things that get sent to me. And especially if we want to call ourselves Christians, then what are we doing sharing this kind of material? We need to get mad, and we need to get defensive, and we need to protect ourselves. And I've seen this kind of stuff in a local congregation. Every Sabbath somebody had to do an announcement, and he went off about Barack Obama not being the president, shouldn't be the president because he wasn't born in the United States, which is false. He was born in Hawaii. It's just a known fact. And just trying to warn people of things. And, you try to shut that down, but people would accuse you of causing division. And I might revisit that a little bit later. And so I had to, battle that and say, this is just wrong. You cannot be going off in a church congregation and upsetting people. And there was African American brethren who took really exception to it because they thought it was racist, and it probably was. And it's difficult, but that was then. This is now, so we're just moving forward. And of course, there's this donut shop prophet, who's kind of our little standby guy. I know him. I know him and his Velcro shoes. And maybe I'm being not too nice here, but the fact of the matter is, he's been sending out emails to people, and I try to get off his list about all these conspiracy theories and very nasty accusations about things that are going on. And I said I don't want nothing to do with this kind of stuff. And again, Sabbatarian individual just can't shut it down. So there's all this hatred that comes out every week from a fellow in BC, and it's sad. It's actually rather sad, thinking they're doing the work. I'm doing the work. Jesus Christ did not call us to be lights in the world, not news anchors or conspiracy theorists, or to do these kinds of things to upset people with worldly things. That's not what we're called to do. But they tell me that they are. They found this niche, and it's not good. So it relates somewhat to my discussion. I may be going off a little bit on the tangent here, but it's easier to talk about those kinds of things than actually, what's the real needs of the person? What's the work itself? What is the true work that has come to us to do? Like, what are we supposed to partake of? We're called to do His works, not our own. And sometimes our own we think is really aligns with God's, but they don't. So we need to be very careful of that. I've seen good people head down these good people that I think were good people and just head down these paths of destruction because they caught some new truth or some internet site or some guy telling them something, and all of a sudden it's got to be the thing. We need to avoid that. So, what's the answer? What's the answer that has come through from Jesus? Jesus' answer said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works. Now, some translations actually use we must work the works, which I prefer from reading it. Some texts, the New King James says I, but some other translations say we. And we're not going to go into reasons why, but there's good reasons why. So we say this again, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but the works of God should be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. So Christ brought, and didn't just necessarily outright correct their issue, but he says neither one of those options, did he sin or did the parents sin? Neither one of those or the grandparents sin. No. He broadened their thinking here. And Christ continually broadened their thinking for them. A lesson on a broader scale. He basically drew attention to himself and his work, or the works of the Father, and did not focus on the man itself who was blind. Okay? Now, we must also not misunderstand that God blinded this person or set it up for him to be blind, for this event to be happened. That's sometimes could be interpreted based on the wording, but if you take away the pronunciations here, or it basically should be read, no, this is the case here. This man was not made purposely blind for this purpose. So it's not really doing that. The message of healing is the work, not the work itself. Not the healing itself. It's the work that's important that he's talking about. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. So he's not talking necessarily about the man's blindness or being healed, but I must do the work. And what's the work? And what are the works of God? One would generally say to preach the gospel. Go out there and preach the gospel, the good news. Okay, that's good. Yet in broader terms, in the broader sense, the works of God exposes darkness. And this is what has happened here in chapter 9, is an exposure of darkness. The works of God, I think, in the broader sense, in the broader scale, if we try to capture it even more, is to expose darkness. And that's being able to actually get on the front lines of this, not hiding back. We got to get on the front lines sometimes to do this. And if that work, if I was doing it, and if we're doing it, that doing it right will mean affliction. Exposing the works of darkness means we are subjecting ourselves and others to affliction. And the title of this message is here, The Big Irritation. The Big Irritation. And I might change it again. But the title of this message is The Big Irritation. And it's funny how titles affect views. I've been watching this for 2 or 3 years now. I'm looking at titles. And if the titles look a little too abstract, they don't get much views, but some of them hit more directly. Who knows? It's a rather interesting thing. I'm not an expert at it. We don't have those kinds of views. But I'm sure there are those who are well adept to understanding it. And there are those who put these really outrageous inflammatory titles they put to some of their messages just to get views, and they get a lot of them. And they're very good at this kind of stuff. But that's not really particularly what we're interested in. So being on the front lines is going to mean affliction and irritation. We talked about this in Isaiah 58. Is this not the fast I have chosen? This sort of self, there's affliction there. The fast, this is the fast I have chosen. Earlier on it says, but you take pleasure in your fasts. No, is this not the fast that I have chosen, the affliction to loose the bonds of wickedness, the affliction to undo the heavy burdens, the affliction to let the oppressed go free, and the affliction that you break every yoke. So there's some degree of effort that is being required of us to do the works of God, and or irritation. A lot of irritation might occur. Not necessarily being irritable, but there are things that can irritate us, but it's part of the work, believe it or not, from what I'm seeing here and as the story unfolds. And that affliction may apply to both the doer of the work and those affected by it. Seems rather abstract, but I think maybe you might pick up where I'm going. And the work of God needs to be interpreted correctly for it to have the most profound effect that we're looking to do. Because we see here in the beginning of John, that the light disturbs the darkness. And as John reported, the light could not apprehend it or could not overcome it. Could not overcome it. The work disturbs and causes actually division. And Jesus Christ says, I've come to cause some problems here. I've come to make it all good, have a big hug fest. And he said he didn't come to do that. He knew what he was doing and the situation he was running into. So that's a message there in itself. The light disturbs the darkness, and the work disturbs and causes division. It's an irritation to the status quo here on earth. It's just an outright irritation. So what was about to occur here, as we will read on, is that he brought light into the man's eyes, and yet exposed and disturbed and irritated the darkness. In a very kind of profound way that's been recorded here, as I said in the beginning, there's some things that have a lasting effect. And this has been studied for years and years and discussed and commented on among many other scriptures. All right, so let's pick it up here. Verse 6, when he said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, with saliva that he was, with his saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. It's not really elaborated on here at all. You kind of wonder. You just kind of wonder how willing the blind man or the blind fellow, was to know what was actually going on. So I don't know if he said, the blind man didn't see him coming, and Jesus Christ said, okay, went over there maybe a couple of yards away or something, and started spitting on the ground. He could probably hear him doing this. There's no exchange. It's okay, can you give me a minute? I'm going to make, I got an eye salve for you that's going to fix this problem. But you got to give me a few minutes. And it probably took more than a few minutes to do this, because if I were to spit on the ground right now or spit on this table, I mean, you can't make much of anything. You can't make, so it's going to take I don't know, it took maybe 15 minutes, half an hour of spitting and working and generating saliva. We just don't know the details. But somehow this fellow subjected himself to having this clay being put in his eyes, rubbed around or somehow put in his eyes. But you know and I know how sensitive the eye is to the smallest of irritants. You get a little peck of dust in there, or you get a little bug, and I've had all these things happen. There's something like that. How sensitive the eye is. So the blind man, he's still going to have those sensitivities there. So he's getting this irritation, this big irritation going on with this. Jesus Christ starts to put it in. He's not saying, oh, this is great. This feels great. Keep on putting that stuff in my eyes. Thanks. Thanks a lot. No. So the man, is in this process of being healed and suffered an affliction. The darkness that he's been in is being overcome or being healed by affliction or by irritants. Basically, he was suffering an irritation, putting that stuff into his eyes. Not comfortable at all. And what do we want to do? Is we want to get rid of it. We want we got something in our eye. How do you fix it? I mean, if you look, I think some of you may remember those science classes I do where they had these wash stations. If you get something in your eye, you stick your head and there's this irrigation that occurs. They need to have these in these lab science. My brother teaches science, and he had to take a student over there and run that thing in the child's eyes, hold the eyes open, in order to make sure his eyesight was not damaged, and nothing came of it. But it's a very real thing. When you get some irritants in your eyes or something, your eyes are very sensitive. And so what was going on here was probably something very uncomfortable, just to say at the very least. But I don't think we truly appreciate it. So he went and washed, got all that irritants out of his eyes. Now, in verse 8, therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen him, he was blind. Is not he who sat and begged? Some said, this is the one. Others said, he is like him. But then he said, I am he. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I washed and I received my sight. And they said to him, where is he? And he said, I don't know. So let's continue reading. Some more things we want to. I was going to read some more verses here so we remember the context. And we'll have a few things we want to talk about here. They brought him, who was formerly blind, to the Pharisees. So I guess the intention is this. Wow, I guess they wanted to. I don't know what the intention was there. So they brought him to the Pharisees. So these are the authorities. One of the authoritative religious leaders at the time. And I think now if somebody was healed this way, they would bring them to the hospital and show the doctors. But in this society, they brought him to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened the eyes. And the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. And so others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. So there was a disruption and irritation and aggravation that was going on. And we've talked about this before. Either it was Darren or I or both of us talked about, spitting and making clay with saliva. There was actually a law prohibiting that. This was sort of, I guess, would come out of sort of the oral laws or some kind of other law that was basically being set out by the religious elite at the time, and how much mud you can make from saliva. It would seem ridiculous, but apparently that's something that existed, from what I can tell. And so that was a Sabbath violation of some kind. So Jesus Christ did that purposely. And the other Sabbath violation was that he sent into the pool of Siloam. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm sure that you'll overlook that. Which is more than a Sabbath day's journey, which was also a prohibition that was laid out at the time. Part of this oral, traditional law, whatever you want to call it. So, they were offended by what had happened. He made clay, and I went and washed. So there's 2 Sabbath violations, according to that custom. But Jesus Christ was using the situation for that purpose, to say, no, this is not a Sabbath violation at all. And what's more important to you, that somebody who was blind now and that's a serious thing, especially back then. Who's going to help you? They said to the blind man, "What do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes." And they called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know this man's a sinner." In other words, you're guilty of something. Even though you got something good happen to you, you better give God the glory, because this guy's a sinner. You don't want to be attached to this guy. You need to indemnify yourself, in other words. The answer said, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." And he answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen." This is kind of like picking it up here. "Why do you want to hear it again?" And then he says something interesting. "Do you also want to become his disciples?" So he's actually using a bit of humor here, of all things. He's actually giving a little jab at the ruling elite here. So we see in the man, as we see here in this little discourse that's coming up, we see in this man some decent intelligence somehow. He's got a sense of humor and knowledge of history and of scriptures, and was able to withstand the intimidation that was coming, because we can see what he says. Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are of Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." So they reviled him. So he stood up to their intimidation, and we can see what he says here in response. The man answered and said to them, "Why? This is a marvelous thing. Like, what's your problem? That you're so hung up on your own status in this world, that your religious status. Why are you so hung up on it that you want to criticize such a wonderful thing that happened?" And it's something we need to be careful of too. "That you do not know where he's from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind." He knew this. This has never happened before. If this man were not from God, who was born blind, that is, if this man were not of God, he could do nothing. So he answered there with knowledge of history and scriptures, and he withstood imitation. So there was something about him, even though he was a beggar, he had no choice. But he certainly knew how to stand up and deal with what was going on. So there was a certain sense of wits about him, despite the fact that he was blind his whole life. It's kind of quite extraordinary, if you think about it. They answered and said to him, "You are completely born in your sins, and you're teaching us." And they cast him out, just cut him off. And, Usually the way to win an argument, if you have the authority, is just to cut somebody off. Hang up on them. That's a way of dealing with it. So this is what they did. You're teaching us. You're going to tell me the score? No, I'm going to tell you the score. You're out. I'm going to hang up on you. It's another way of saying it. It's not very pleasant, but that's not how you get to the truth. And being cast out at this time was very serious. Being cast out of the synagogue means that person is ostracized by everyone. So it was not very pleasant here as to what happened. So after he heard he was being cast out, Jesus went to him. Jesus went to see him. So in verse 35, and I'll read here, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" So he saw his authority, and Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. It's interesting. It's good that Jesus came to him and didn't leave him to his own devices after being cast out, because that's pretty rough. He's just got this miracle happen, and then he gets cast out. And it's like, I wonder how bewildered or whatever he was, how he felt. But Jesus, it looks to me, went and looked for him. And he now says, "You now have seen him. Now you see me. And now you're talking to him. You're talking to him. Me," Christ is saying. He couldn't see him before, but now his eyes have been cured, and now his blindness turned to sight. Both seen him and hear him. As a sort of an interlude here, the Pharisees were cautious men, very conservative. But they're actually not being conservative, because we like to say, well, we're kind of conservative. Just be careful of not becoming a preservative. That's the one thing. They were actually being preservatives. They were embalming the past and holding on to traditions. They weren't able to accept something new and exciting, even as this. If something that came along and contradicted their preconceived notions of who they are, and worldviews, these preconceived notions. And we develop those preconceived notions. We don't get them at birth. We get them taught through our lives, or we end up getting into a teaching, or we start to have certain experiences, and we start to build this body of belief or truth, and whether it's religious or some theology that we developed, like the disciples had in the beginning, and we build this thing, and we insert ourselves in it and build this shell around it. That's called, we need to be careful of not doing that. And we've all been guilty of it somehow. Somehow becoming preservatives, thinking we're being conservative. Because those who say, now can you imagine, I don't know, I guess there's some very bold preachers, bold people that say, we have all the truth. We have the truth. This is the truth. To come to the truth. We have the truth. We want to be careful of saying that, but they are those, though, who are blind, and they do want to see. And why do I say that? Because nobody says that. Nobody ever says that. I have all the truth. No, I don't ever hear anybody saying that, but it's sort of subjectively provided to us. It's sort of like said, I have the truth. When did you come to the knowledge of the truth? The truth. The truth is good. I mean, things that are true. Jesus Christ says, and then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. All right. But nobody really says that we have all the truth. I know all the facts. But you start to see this kind of stuff coming out. You started seeing it kind of exposed when certain beliefs are challenged. Certain things that were taught their whole life, or certain things that they believe to be true their whole life, get challenged. And they don't want to consider it properly. And that's the point. We kind of just don't want to see it. He talks about later, it says, to the Pharisees, then some of the Pharisees, well, let's pick it up here, verse 39. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who may see may be blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see, therefore your sin remains.'" So we say we see, but they saw this man being healed. An incredible healing, which cannot be contradicted, and the evidence is there. And then they say, "No, it's not true," even though the evidence is right there. So when we're faced with beliefs, our beliefs are being challenged, then we need to, and then we throw up resistance, or I don't want to see this. I don't want to see what you wrote. I don't want to see that message you did. I don't want to talk about this because I have developed this, I have this set of beliefs and I don't want it challenged. We tend to want to do this. And there are those, and Darren and I've been talking about, this belief in Anglo-Israelism. They absolutely just do not want to face the truth about it. So they're blind. That kind of blindness, I'm not talking about questioning their salvation or getting into any of that, but this kind of blindness actually inhibits growth. It inhibits being able to do the works of Him who has sent us. Because if we're going to go around thinking that we can carry that doctrine and use that as some way of expanding our church or doing these kinds of things, that's just blindness, and it's ineffective, and God resists it. God isn't interested in having that stuff going around. And there's some other things too that we've talked about here. Unmerited pardon. Grace is unmerited pardon or unmerited favor. That's not true. And I know that people hold on to these things. It's very difficult. Yeah. Among other things, in Matthew 18, and just various other beliefs that people have held on for years. Regarding the holy days and everything, just what matters. And some of them get very defensive, maybe angry. But we need to consider all these things properly. We need to be patient and not just be reactive, is the way the Pharisees or the ruling elite here reacted to something so wonderful. And so we need to be very careful not to fall in this kind of trap too. There's so much in here in this chapter 9 and leads to chapter 10 that is recorded for our purposes. This is not just a commentary on history. There's something here for us to take into account and take personally. There's something there. In John chapter 7, verse 16, let's pick it up here, is going back. Jesus answered and said to them, "My doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone wills to do his will, he shall know concerning the doctrine whether it is from God or whether I speak on my own authority." So if we need to know, we need to know concerning the doctrine. We need to get this right. We want to get this right. He who speaks for himself seeks his own glory. This is the stuff we talked about before, trying to build these organizational things up. Sending out a magazine, for example, that was totally dedicated to say that the throne in England, the British throne, is really the throne of David. Throwing that out there, that's he who speaks for himself seeks his own glory. That's what that is. That's exactly what that material is doing. And it's totally contradicts Scripture. Christ is the son of David. He was the rightful heir, not some other alternative route. It's just something that we need to kind of take in consideration. But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. So if we do the proper seeking, and if we do the proper doctrine, God says, you're good. It's quite incredible. I don't want to focus on the scripture now, but we need to do the right thing. And when our beliefs are challenged, or if something upsets us or irritates us, it's that big irritation. Maybe there's something there to consider. And sometimes not. But we need to do this like the Bereans or whatever we want to say. So if we say we want to do his works, or that we do his works, we need to be willing to suffer enduring doing the work. So knowing concerning the doctrine can be an irritable thing. Trust me, I know. As it can upend certain beliefs that we may have had, and we used to think they were made as part of the church. So it made these certain belief systems or certain things that we were always taught to believe as becomes part of our identity. We identify with them to say, I am of the true faith. And that's, we need to be careful of that. There's some things that are very identifiable for us to hold on to, but some things are not. We're not going to belabor that point. All right. So this is the work of God, that you believe in him and the one whom he sent. That's what it says in Scripture. So I want to conclude this way and sort of, I don't know how quite to conclude this. There's one strange thing that I didn't anticipate, and maybe I should have or could have, or in ministry. One strange and uncomfortable thing in ministry. Because sometimes it is required if we're going to do this work, is to be a disturber, or an irritant, or a contrarian. That's part of being in the ministry, part of doing the work. Putting clay, irritable clay, in someone's eyes. Doing this kind of work so that the blind may see. It's an irritation, and it's one of the worst irritations to get something in your eye. But that seems to be a part of the work, to be a disturber. Some kind of irritant. Not to always try to make it do the most softest sermons and the softest messages in the softest way all the time. That's apparently not what it's about. And it's not talking about correction or scolding. It's about saying things that are uncomfortable truths and things that maybe some people believe that are not true. And maybe that sometimes is what it's called to be. And I've been in those situations where I've stirred things up and I kind of look back and I go, well, could I have done this better maybe, but maybe not. It's just the way it is. And I get pushback. And I've had all this pushback for those who have been in the Church of God longer than me. And they were taught things long ago. And they've got paperwork to back up and rings and all this to back this up. But nope, it's simply not there. And I've gotten rejection. And, well, that's okay. That's okay. But it's just that unusual thing that I've come to realize. Just sitting in my musings, thinking about the past and what I've worked on and congregations I work with. So my advice to anyone who wants to preach, anywhere from sermonette to a sermon or some sort of major ministry, my message to anyone who wants to preach is first this: don't. Unless if you want to be effective, do not be afraid to irritate. Do not be afraid to be a big irritation. Do not be afraid. Don't be political. Don't be casual. Don't hint. Don't be so subtle. You don't have to be as subtle. Well, you can be, but there's a problem. You have to address it. Because irritation leads to something. It leads to irrigation. Just like our blind man. He got a terrible irritation to his eyes. Then he had to go a fairly long journey, a long enough journey to wash in the pool of Siloam. I'm sure somebody helped him. And now he sees. His irritation leads to irrigation and sight. And so that we're no longer blind to our own blindness. And that's part of overcoming. That just seems to be a part of it. I'm speaking from experiential awareness, from where I'm coming from, from what this teaches me, reading the scriptures. So it's much easier to discuss abstract subjects, getting up there and talking abstractly and doing rote ideas and just saying things as palatable as one could try to make things. But that's not really the point. We are here to minister to the actual concrete needs to the life of people, to go out and reach them where they are at, where they're mentally at, where they're emotionally at. And sometimes that's a difficult and irritable thing to do. But it's just something that the calling calls us to do, and we all need to participate that in some way. It is how it is here. And sometimes that need of your brethren is difficult to discuss. A lot of difficulties we need to come across, and there's a word I'm thinking for right now, and but it's not coming to me because this is all real time. But we need to cross those lines to say, this is what really needs to be discussed. This is what's really going on, and not be afraid to say it. And I've had times where I was afraid to say certain things, but that's okay. All right, brethren, I'm going to sign off here. It's been a long week. Happy Sabbath if you've joined us this Sabbath or some other Sabbath, and hope you're having okay. You're staying warm and you're staying out of the snow, and God is blessing you and protecting you, and we hope this has been a blessing to you as well. Look forward to any comments or feedback, good or bad or indifferent. Until then, till the next time we meet here on Shepherd's Voice Magazine, take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.